in the dead of winter, when the snow buried everything in silence. She found him, barely breathing, frostbitten, wild. A lone woman in the Montana wilderness opens her cabin door to find a dying baby puma on her porch. No one around for miles. No ranger to call. Just her, the storm, and the decision of a lifetime. She saves him. But years later, when disaster strikes, he saves her back. What happens between them will break you. And heal you in the same breath. You think you know Wild? You've never seen a bond like this. Stay to the end, you won't believe what he did. Sometimes, the only thing colder than the wind is the silence you carry inside. Whispers in the snow. The wind screamed across the frozen landscape of Red Lodge, Montana, like a chorus of ghosts. Thick snow clung to the ground in heavy drifts, swallowing every sign of life beneath a blanket of silence. Perched alone on the edge of the Beartooth Mountains, Elena Ridgewood's cabin stood firm, weather-worn, and untouched by time, just like her. Inside, the flickering glow of a wood-burning stove cast dancing shadows across the log walls. A half-finished illustration lay on her wooden desk, untouched for days. The colors were muted, earth tones, the kind used for sketching wildlife, but the spark behind the brush had long faded. Elena, 39, sat curled beneath a heavy flannel blanket in a worn leather chair, mug of black coffee cooling beside her. Her features were gentle but tired, soft cheekbones, sharp hazel eyes that had seen too much, and hair once a proud chestnut, now faded by sun and sorrow. The kind of beauty that wasn't loud. The kind that lasted. She hadn't spoken to another person in over 2 weeks, and she preferred it that way. It had been 5 years since the avalanche took Peter, her fiancé, her anchor, her reason. Since then, life had narrowed to lines and shadows, sunrise sketches, long hikes into quiet forests, the solitude of grief. People in town whispered about the ghost woman on the ridge. She let them talk. What did they know about rebuilding a life from dust? On this particular evening, a blizzard rolled in earlier than forecasted. Snow slammed against the window panes like fists. The wood groaned under the weight of the wind. Elena moved with calm precision, stacking logs into the stove, checking lanterns, filling thermoses, habits born from years of isolation. Then, a sound. Faint. Barely there. A scratching, maybe? Or a branch scraping the porch. She paused. Waited. There it was again. Elena crossed to the front door, her instincts alert but not afraid. Grabbing the rifle from the coat rack, a habit she never skipped, she cracked the door open 2 inches and was immediately hit with a rush of freezing air. Her breath caught in her throat. There, collapsed at the foot of her porch steps, was a bundle of fur. Small, trembling, barely moving. Not a dog. Not a coyote. Something else. She stepped out carefully, snow crunching beneath her boots. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light of the porch lamp, and her heart skipped. It was a baby puma. Tiny, no more than 8 weeks old, soaked in snow and shivering violently. One paw curled awkwardly under its body, black pads nearly purple with frostbite. Its eyes, wide glazed, barely blinked. Elena dropped to her knees. "What are you doing out here alone?" The cub made no sound. Only a weak exhale. She looked out into the endless white. No tracks. No mother. She had a choice. And the storm was closing in. Saving something wild means surrendering your own walls. The first fire. Elena didn't think, she moved. She scooped the baby puma into her arms, feeling its frail body flinch weakly against her chest. It wasn't much heavier than a house cat, but every breath it took felt like a battle. Snow clung to its thin coat, and its ears were stiff with cold. As she cradled it closer, she could feel the tremors rippling beneath its golden-brown fur. The frostbite had set into one of its hind paws, a bluish-gray color that made her stomach twist. Inside, she laid him on an old wool blanket by the stove and turned the heat up fast. Her hands moved with practiced calm, but her mind raced. Was this legal? Was it smart? What if it bit her? What if it didn't make it? But none of that mattered now. It was here. And it was dying. She heated a bowl of water and soaked a cloth, gently wiping the snow from his fur. The puma flinched at first, but made no sound. His energy was nearly gone. She checked his breathing, shallow, uneven. His ribs protruded like fragile branches, and his belly was tight with hunger. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Don't you quit on me now." The vet's number was scrawled on a pad by the window, but Elena already knew the answer before she picked up the phone. One ring, then two, then voicemail. The storm had taken down the lines. There'd be no help coming tonight. She rummaged through her kitchen, grabbing powdered goat's milk she kept on hand for orphan fawns in the spring. She warmed it gently and filled a baby syringe. The first few drops touched his lips. Nothing. "Come on," she coaxed, tapping his nose softly. A flicker. A twitch. Then, a faint, instinctive suck. Her chest heaved with quiet relief as he took a few tentative sips. Not much, but enough. Enough to keep the spark alive. Hours passed. The wind howled against the cabin, but the space inside became a sanctuary of soft light and slow breaths. Elena sat on the floor, legs stretched toward the fire, the cub wrapped in a towel beside her. Every now and then, she'd check his temperature, rub his frostbitten paw, whisper to him as if her voice could tether him to life. "You're not dying tonight," she said. "Not while I'm here." At some point, she dozed off. When she woke, the cabin was quiet. The fire had dimmed, but the cub was still there, curled tightly, his breathing steadier. He had made it through the night. Elena stared at the creature beside her, wild, vulnerable, impossibly beautiful. Something in her cracked open. She wasn't just keeping him alive. He was keeping her alive, too. Outside, the storm began to break, revealing the first sliver of a Montana dawn. And inside that cabin, a bond had begun, one not forged by ownership, but survival. You don't earn a wild animal's trust, you grow it, moment by moment, like fire from a spark. Feeding the wild. Morning light poured through the frost-glazed windows of Elena's cabin, painting the wooden floor in pale streaks of gold. The storm had passed, but the chill remained, a sharp reminder of how close life and death had come the night before. The cub was still asleep, wrapped tightly in a blanket by the fireplace. His breathing was shallow but rhythmic, his tiny chest rising and falling with fragile persistence. Elena crouched beside him, marveling at the creature that had stumbled into her world. She studied him like she would one of her sketches, tracking the curve of his spine, the way his whiskers twitched in dreams, the subtle dappling of dark spots along his golden coat. He was magnificent, even half-frozen and weak. But he wouldn't survive unless she kept him fed. That morning, she tried again with the goat's milk, using a makeshift bottle fashioned from a rubber-tipped dropper. The first attempts were clumsy. He turned his head, resisted. But slowly, as the scent warmed, instinct returned. His tiny mouth latched on. He drank. Only an ounce at first, then another. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd dared to hope for. After every feeding, Elena would wipe his mouth with a cloth, gently massage his belly like the wildlife rehabbers had taught her years ago. She hadn't worked with big cats before, but a cub was a cub. And this one, this wild soul, was fighting to live. She needed a name for him. Names mattered. Names made things real. She whispered different ones aloud: Chase, Leo, Scout. None felt right. Then she remembered a word from a trip she'd once taken to Hawaii years ago, back when Peter was still alive. Koa. It meant brave. Fighter. "Your name is Koa," she said softly. The cub blinked slowly as if acknowledging the choice. The first few days were touch and go. Koa's frostbitten paw remained sensitive, and Elena was careful to keep it warm but unwrapped, watching for signs of infection. She cleaned it twice a day, applied ointment, and even sang softly to him, something she hadn't done in years, not since her world had collapsed under avalanche snow. Koa's strength came back in small wins. By the fourth day, he lifted his head on his own. By the sixth, he followed the sound of her footsteps. He still limped, still slept more than he was awake, but the light in his amber eyes had returned. And something deeper had begun to grow between them. When she sketched now, he watched her from the rug, eyes half closed, tail twitching with contentment. Elena hadn't drawn with such feeling in years. But with Koa nearby, the lines seemed to flow again. Not long after, he curled into the crook of her arm as she napped on the floor beside the fire. Wild or not, he had chosen her. And she, without even realizing it, had started choosing life again. Love doesn't always arrive with words. Sometimes it comes in silence, curled at your feet. Two shadows by the fire. It was just past midnight when Elena woke to the faint sound of claws scratching gently against wood. Not sharp, not urgent, just a light, rhythmic tapping from the floorboards near the stove. She sat up on the couch, heart thudding. The fire had burned low, casting warm orange light that danced in soft pulses across the cabin walls. In the quiet, she saw him. Koa. No longer tucked in the nest of towels and blankets she'd arranged for him days ago, the puma cub was hobbling across the room on unsteady legs. His frostbitten paw barely touched the ground, but he moved with a quiet determination, drawn toward the sound of her breathing. Elena didn't speak. She didn't dare. She just watched as Koa paused halfway to her, swaying slightly from exhaustion. His ears twitched. His eyes, wide and golden, locked with hers. And then, without warning, he stumbled the last few steps and collapsed beside her. His small body pressed against the leg of the couch, tail curling near her bare ankle. The warmth of him, the trust of him, unraveled something tightly knotted in her chest. She slowly lowered herself to the floor, moving gently so as not to scare him. Her fingers hovered above his head, then finally landed in the soft fur between his ears. He flinched for a moment, then let out a sound she hadn't expected. A low, gravelly purr. It vibrated through his body and into her skin. She laughed. Not a loud laugh, just a whisper of it, barely audible, but it was the first time she had laughed like that in 5 years. From that night on, something shifted between them. Koa began to follow her around the cabin, a little shadow that limped behind her every step. She built a small ramp near the fireplace so he could climb up onto the cushion by the window and sunbathe during the day. He grew curious, sniffing her pencils, nudging the edge of her sketchpad, pawing at the string on her hoodie. One morning, Elena awoke to find her worn hiking boot missing. She discovered it on the rug beside Koa, half covered by his little paw, as if he were guarding it in his sleep. By the second week, she stopped setting barriers between them at night. Koa would curl against her back as she slept on the couch, the same way Peter used to pull the blanket up over her shoulders. Sometimes, grief hides in unexpected places. And sometimes, healing does too. Elena began painting again. Not just wildlife studies for her contracts, but personal work, raw, emotional pieces that spilled out of her like a confession. Koa became her muse. The angle of his eyes, the soft fur along his spine, the way his ears perked when he heard her voice. He was still a wild animal. She never forgot that. But somehow, he had found a home in her arms. And she, for the first time in years, had begun to believe in home again. Raising the wild is never quiet, its teeth, torn curtains, and the kind of love that leaves scars. Claws and chaos. By the time summer warmed the Montana hills, Koa was no longer a cub. He was a force. At 8 months old, he weighed nearly 70 pounds, his lean frame packed with raw muscle and restless energy. His golden coat had thickened, the last traces of his kitten-like spots fading into a sleek, solid hue. Only the old scar above his right eye remained as a reminder of where he came from, and what he'd survived. And so had Elena, survived, that is. But just barely. Every day felt like a new test of patience and improvisation. Koa had outgrown his cozy spot by the fireplace, and now spent most of his time leaping across furniture, knocking down everything from books to lamps with his oversized paws. A bowl of soup left unattended? Gone. A couch pillow? Shredded. Her favorite hiking boots? Carried outside and buried next to the garden hose. She tried not to laugh, but often failed. Still, it wasn't always funny. There were nights when Koa paced endlessly by the windows, whining softly, drawn by the scent of elk or the howl of a distant coyote. His body longed for the hunt, his instincts still sharp despite his months indoors. Elena could see the conflict in his amber eyes, love for her, and longing for something he didn't fully understand. She tried to strike a balance. Every morning, they hiked the property together, her in thick boots and canvas gear, him bounding ahead, ears perked and tail swishing like a metronome. She began training sessions using food puzzles, scent trails, and retrieval games. It kept him busy for an hour, maybe 2. But there was always more energy left. So she built. Using lumber from the local supply store, Elena constructed a large outdoor enclosure behind the cabin, reinforced fencing, tall trees inside for climbing, rocks to perch on. She called it Koa's playground, and though he sulked the first time she guided him inside, he soon came to love it. He would sleep on a boulder in the sun, tail draped over the edge like a king on his throne. Sometimes, Elena would sit nearby with her sketchpad, capturing his silhouette against the sky. And still, their bond remained, wild and warm. At night, he came inside, curled beside her on the floor while she read or painted. He'd rest his head on her foot like he used to when he was small, though now his skull was the size of a bowling ball. Elena began to realize something that both comforted and terrified her. Koa was no longer the cub she had rescued. He was becoming a full-grown mountain lion. And no matter how deep their love ran, the line between affection and danger was growing thinner. He hadn't crossed it. But it was there. And it was real. Still, when he nuzzled her side and purred in his sleep, she smiled and whispered, "We'll figure it out. Just you and me." Because that's what they always did. Peace has a price, and the world doesn't always welcome what it doesn't understand. Eyes over the fence. The trouble started with the chickens. One morning, just as Elena poured fresh water into Koa's outdoor trough, the sound of angry voices pierced the quiet air. She turned, startled, to find her neighbor, Greg Carlton, storming up the gravel path with his wife trailing close behind. Greg was in his 60s, broad-shouldered and red-faced from the sun, or maybe from rage. "I want to talk about your animal," he barked, jabbing a finger toward the enclosure. Elena stepped between him and the gate, instinctively protective. "His name is Koa," she said calmly, "and he's behind a double-reinforced fence." Greg scoffed. "Don't care what you call him. He scared the hell out of my granddaughter yesterday. She was riding her bike when he jumped at the fence. Thought it was gonna give way." "He wasn't trying to hurt her," Elena replied. "He was playing. He always reacts to motion." "Playing?" Greg's voice rose. "That's a mountain lion, not a Labrador. I've got chickens less than 100 yards away. I'm not gonna wait until he breaks loose and tears through my coop, or worse." Elena opened her mouth to respond, but Mrs. Carlton cut in, gentler but no less firm. "We all know what happened last winter when you found him. And we've all been patient. But he's not a baby anymore. And you live alone. What if something happens?" That one landed harder than Elena expected. She stood silent for a moment, the weight of it pressing down. Later that day, Greg filed a formal complaint with the county. Word spread fast through Red Lodge. Some neighbors were sympathetic, others not so much. A few folks from town drove past her property just to catch a glimpse of the woman with the lion. One man even tried to film through the trees. Elena ran him off with a stern glare and a threat to call the sheriff. The local game warden, Officer Riley, came by 2 days later. To his credit, he wasn't aggressive, just cautious. He inspected the enclosure, asked about feeding schedules, enrichment, healthcare. "I've never seen a private setup this secure," he admitted. "But if he gets out, even once, it's over." Elena nodded, swallowing her pride. He won't. But she couldn't shake the feeling of a ticking clock. That night, she sat on the porch while Koa prowled his space under the moonlight. His eyes glowed in the dark, powerful, wild, alive. He paused when he saw her, then padded over to the fence and pressed his head against it. She rose and walked to the other side, placing her palm against his through the mesh. No matter what anyone said, this wasn't a pet. This was family. But now, the world beyond her trees wanted to decide what was safe, what was acceptable. And the line between peace and fear had never felt so razor-thin. She whispered, "They don't see you like I do." Koa blinked once. He didn't have to answer. To love something wild is to know it may never stay. The edge of goodbye. Spring crept slowly into Red Lodge, coaxing green from beneath the snow and melting ice from the river's edge. Birds returned. Streams ran fast. Life stirred. But Elena felt the heaviness of something else, something inevitable. Koa was growing fast. At nearly 4 months, he had doubled in size. No longer the fragile cub she had rescued, he now stood tall enough to reach the edge of the kitchen table. His sleek golden coat had darkened into maturity, his powerful legs rippling with muscle even through the limp that lingered from his frostbitten paw. His playful swats were stronger. His instincts, sharper. His eyes, wilder. One evening, Elena watched as he crouched low near the glass door, tracking a deer that had wandered into the clearing. His body flattened, his tail twitched. For the first time, She saw not a companion, but a predator. She knew what she had to do. It broke her heart. That night, she made the call. A wildlife rehabilitator in Bozeman confirmed what she already suspected. Koa was still young enough to adapt to the wild, if released carefully and away from human settlements. The woman on the phone was kind but firm. "You've done more than most," she said. "But he's a mountain lion. He won't stay tame. He's not meant to live in a house." Neither of them used the word goodbye, but it lingered in every silence. The next morning, Elena packed a crate of supplies: meat, water, blankets, a first aid kit, and loaded Koa into her old pickup. He didn't fight. He never did with her. But his eyes darted nervously as the road twisted deeper into the wilderness. They drove 2 hours north to a place far beyond the edge of the public trails, near Stillwater Canyon, a place wild enough to offer a second chance. Elena parked near the edge of a high ridge overlooking a vast expanse of pine and rock. She left the truck door open, laid down the last of the venison steaks beside a creek, and sat with Koa beneath the tall trees. For a long time, neither of them moved. She stroked the ridge above his eye, the faint scar he'd carry for life, and whispered, "You don't belong to me. You never did. But thank you for choosing me anyway." Koa nuzzled her hand once, then turned toward the trees. No ceremony. No hesitation. He walked into the forest. And disappeared. Elena sat alone as the wind rustled the branches. She stayed there until night fell, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the darkness, hoping for one last glimpse. There wasn't one. She drove home with an empty passenger seat and an ache in her chest that no sketch could capture. The cabin was too quiet. That night, for the first time since the blizzard, she cried. Not because she had lost him, but because she had loved him enough to let him go. Some bonds, no matter how wild, are never truly broken. Blood on the snow. 2 weeks passed. Each day, Elena walked the edge of the forest behind her cabin with silent hope and guarded dread. She left out food, always fresh meat, always at the same spot, but nothing was touched. Not a track. Not a sound. She told herself this was good. It meant Koa was adjusting, surviving, learning to live as he was meant to. The forest had reclaimed him. Still, every creak of the trees, every rustle in the underbrush made her heart lurch. Then one evening near dusk, as she gathered firewood just beyond the back fence, she saw movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned. At first, she thought it was a trick of light. A shape crouched low beneath the spruce trees, too large to be a fox, too silent to be a deer. Then it limped forward. And her breath caught. Koa. He looked older. Fiercer. His golden coat was streaked with dirt and pine needles. He was thinner, ribs just beginning to show, but not starved. But what made her heart drop was the blood. A deep slash across his shoulder glistened in the fading light, and smaller wounds tracked along his side. "Koa!" she gasped, dropping the bundle of logs. He didn't rush to her, not like before. He stood there, swaying slightly, eyes locked on her like he was trying to be sure. His ears twitched. Then slowly, cautiously, he crossed the yard. She fell to her knees, arms open but still. When he reached her, Koa collapsed, his head against her thigh. Elena ran trembling hands over his body, whispering softly, checking every wound. The slash was deep, but clean. Likely a claw mark. And not from prey. Another Puma. She cleaned his injuries inside the cabin, using the same first aid kit she hadn't touched since the winter. Koa didn't fight her. He let her wash the blood away, dry his fur, wrap him in warm towels again, like before. As she worked, she whispered, "What happened to you out there?" But deep down she knew. He'd tried. Tried to live in the wild. Tried to become what he was born to be. But sometimes the wild doesn't welcome its own. Over the next few days, Koa barely moved. He slept beside the fire, body curled tightly, ears flicking only when she left the room. Elena kept watch, speaking in soft murmurs, feeding him gently. By the 4th day, he stood again, wobbly proud. She made her decision then. No more halfway. If the world wouldn't take him back, he wouldn't have to beg for a place in it. She began converting the shed into an outdoor den. Built new fencing, reinforced the gates. Created space, safe, but open. A halfway home for something not quite wild, not quite tame. Koa didn't belong in the forest. He belonged with her. He had come back, not just to survive, but to stay. And this time, she would never ask him to leave again. Disaster doesn't knock. It arrives with smoke, silence, and no time to say goodbye. Ash in the wind. The wind changed before the smoke came. Elena noticed it first as a low unease. Birds vanished from the trees, the air grew thick and dry, and the usual pine-scented breeze turned sharp, like iron and dust. She stood barefoot on her porch, mug in hand, and watched the sky darken, not with clouds, but with something worse. A deep orange hue bled across the horizon. She stepped down into the yard, eyes scanning the treetops. The stillness was wrong. Animals had gone quiet. Even Koa, normally bounding around his enclosure at this hour, stood statue-like near the gate, ears pinned back, nose twitching toward the wind. Then she smelled it. Smoke. It came fast after that. The emergency alert buzzed on her old phone, wildfire spreading east from the Gallatin Range, driven by strong winds and dry heat. Several cabins already evacuated. The ridge was next. She dropped the mug. It shattered on the porch as she sprinted inside, yanking open drawers, pulling out her go-bag, first aid, documents, spare clothes. Her hands shook as she grabbed Koa's medical records, stuffed them into a folder, and zipped the pack closed. Then came the sirens, distant, but moving closer. She ran to Koa's gate, keys jangling, breath short. "Come on, boy," she panted, opening the outer latch. "We have to go." Koa didn't move. He paced the back of the enclosure, low and tense, tail flicking. The smell of smoke had reached him, and panic sparked in his amber eyes. She stepped inside and knelt. "Koa," she whispered, softer now, steady. "Please. We don't have time." But he backed away, growling, not at her, but at everything. At the sky, the smoke, the sudden chaos. His wild instincts had taken over. He didn't understand that she was trying to save him. In the distance, flames licked the edges of the ridge. Elena heard the crackling. The fire was coming. With trembling hands, she unclipped the leash she never used anymore and tossed it aside. "Then don't be leashed," she said. "But don't stay." She opened the main gate fully and stepped back, giving him space. Koa hesitated, then bolted. Not toward her. Toward the woods. She screamed after him, voice ragged, "Koa!" But he was gone. The smoke grew thicker now. Trees along the edge of the clearing were glowing red at their roots. Sparks danced in the air like fireflies from hell. Elena had no choice. She ran. She grabbed her pack, her coat, slammed the door behind her. The cabin might survive. It might not. Right now, survival meant distance. She leapt into the pickup, started the engine, and peeled away from the property, the rearview mirror filling with smoke and flame. Tears blurred her vision, not from the smoke, not entirely. She had lost him again. But this time, not to the wild. To the fire. When all else burns away, what remains is loyalty. Out of the smoke. The forest behind Elena blazed like a living monster, its breath a roar of flame and smoke chasing her down the gravel road. Her truck fishtailed as she rounded the last bend, heat pressing through the windshield like a fist. She coughed, chest tight, vision smeared with tears and ash. She should have kept driving. But something made her stop. Just ahead, a fallen tree blocked the road, a massive pine, scorched and blackened, too heavy to move. She slammed the brakes, the truck skidding sideways, throwing her against the seatbelt. "Come on," she muttered, fumbling with the buckle. Her fingers shook. She jumped out and tried to climb over the trunk, slipping on the bark. The fire was closing in behind her, smoke thickening into a choking wall. And then, a snap. Her boot caught on a root. She fell hard, face first onto the rocky dirt, and pain exploded behind her eyes. She tried to sit up but couldn't. Her leg was twisted beneath her, and blood from a gash on her forehead blurred the world into swirls of red and gray. Somewhere in the haze, she heard herself whisper, "Koa." She coughed again once, twice, then everything started to fade. Until something warm pressed against her cheek. A low growl. Familiar. Protective. Amber eyes. Koa. He was there. Through the smoke, through the chaos, her mountain lion had returned. His coat was covered in soot, singed at the tips, and his ribs heaved with every breath. But his eyes were locked on her, wild, determined, alive. Without hesitation, he leaned down and gently grabbed the collar of her jacket with his teeth. Then he pulled. Elena groaned as her body dragged across the ground. The pain was sharp, blinding, but she was moving. Inch by inch, Koa tugged her through the ash, past the tree, away from the fire. His muscles strained, his paws slipped, but he never let go. He growled with effort, snapped at falling embers, blinked against the smoke, but he never stopped. Not until they reached the curve in the road. That's where headlights broke through the dark. A fire truck skidded to a halt, and 2 firefighters jumped out, shouting. Koa froze, body tense, eyes flashing. "Whoa!" one yelled, raising a hand. "Is that?" Elena found just enough breath to whisper, "Don't hurt him." Then the world spun again, and everything went black. When she woke in the hospital, her body ached from smoke inhalation and bruises, but she was alive. An oxygen mask covered her mouth. A nurse leaned over and said, "You're lucky. They said a mountain lion dragged you out." She tried to speak, tried to ask. But the door opened, and a familiar figure stepped in. Officer Riley. He smiled, shaking his head. "That cat of yours. He didn't run from the fire. He ran into it. For you." Elena closed her eyes. Of course he did. Because sometimes, even the wild can come back for what it loves. Some scars don't mark the end. They mark where the healing began. Not just surviving. Elena sat by the window, wrapped in a fleece blanket, sunlight pouring through the hospital glass in soft golden rays. Outside, the hills beyond Red Lodge were blackened in patches, the land scarred but still standing, just like her. Her head throbbed. Her leg was stitched and braced. But the real ache sat deeper. Koa. She hadn't seen him since the firefighters pulled her away. No one knew where he'd gone. She kept asking, but the answers were always the same: he disappeared into the trees. Wild animals don't usually stick around. He probably went back where he came from. But Koa wasn't just a wild animal. He was hers, and she was his. 3 days later, that truth walked through her hospital door. It was Officer Riley again, this time without the usual badge and duty stiffness. He looked uncertain as he entered, a clipboard under one arm. "You got a visitor," he said quietly. Elena sat up straighter, eyes wide. He stepped aside. And there he was. Koa padded in slowly, his amber eyes calm but alert, a makeshift leash held loosely by a volunteer from the local wildlife center. His coat had been cleaned, his paws bandaged, but his posture, tail low, ears flicking, was pure tension. Until he saw her. Then, with a low, breathy chirp, he lunged forward. The leash fell from the volunteer's hand, and in seconds, Koa had crossed the room and laid his massive head on Elena's lap. She buried her hands into the familiar warmth of his fur, tears falling silently onto the back of his neck. "Hey boy," she whispered. "You found me again." Riley cleared his throat, trying not to smile. They wanted to move him to a sanctuary. Thought it'd be safer. But he wouldn't let anyone near him. Sat at the edge of your burned property for 3 days straight. Didn't eat. Didn't drink. Elena nodded without looking up. "He doesn't need a sanctuary." "Well," Riley said, "you might still have to fight for that. There are regulations. But I pulled a few strings." He handed her a packet of papers, licensing applications, legal forms, and letters of support from local veterinarians and wildlife experts. "You get your land certified as a private rescue habitat, and you can keep him. Legally. It won't be easy, but it's possible." Elena looked up, eyes rimmed red. "You'd do that for us?" Riley shrugged. "You both earned it." Over the following weeks, as her body healed, Elena worked on the paperwork, made calls from her hospital bed, drew diagrams for fencing improvements. Koa never left her side. He slept curled up beneath her cot, rising only when nurses entered, then watching them like a sentinel. They were both survivors now, not just of fire, but of loss, of loneliness, of the wild edges of life. And together, they were building something new. Not a return to what was, but a beginning of what could be. Together. You don't move on from the ones you love. You move forward, with them inside you. The quiet after. Autumn returned to Red Lodge like a soft apology, cool winds, rustling leaves, and skies the color of old denim. The land that had burned now wore patches of green, like life insisting on starting over. So did Elena. She stood at the edge of the clearing where her cabin once stood. Charred beams had been cleared. A new foundation had been laid. Everything smelled of fresh-cut lumber and smoke-tinged memory. But the real weight wasn't the rebuild. It was the moment. Koa padded beside her, his golden coat gleaming in the sun. He walked taller now, stronger. Fully grown. Nearly 130 pounds of raw power, but still hers in every way that mattered. His scar above the eye was more visible now, no longer a wound but a badge. He nudged her hip gently, then sat beside her. And she finally spoke. "I should have told you goodbye that day," she whispered. Her hand reached down, fingers brushing the thick fur behind his ears. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Letting you go. Giving you back to the wild. But I didn't realize. We were each other's wild." The wind moved through the trees like a sigh. She pulled a small tin from her jacket pocket. Inside, a few of Peter's ashes. She hadn't spread them before. Couldn't. For 5 years, they'd sat on the mantel in a box she avoided. But now, something inside her was ready. She opened the lid and tilted it gently into the breeze. The ashes caught the wind, spinning in the sunlight like silver dust, then disappearing over the ridge he loved to hike. "Goodbye, love," she whispered. Koa sat still, watching her, not understanding but feeling. He leaned gently into her side. The tears came fast and full, but they didn't drown her this time. They washed something clean. Later, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Elena walked back to the temporary cabin, Koa at her side. Inside, sketches lined the walls, paintings of Koa at every stage, of fire and snow, of quiet moments between storms. On the table sat one final piece, unfinished. It was a portrait of the two of them, side by side, her hand on his back, eyes looking forward, not at each other, but toward something bigger. Hope. She picked up the brush. With a steady hand, she added the last stroke. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. The door creaked as Koa lay beside her, his body curled on the rug like he used to as a cub years ago. Elena leaned back, exhaled, and smiled softly. "We're home." Not because they'd survived the fire. Not because the paperwork was done. But because they had chosen to keep showing up for each other, even when the world burned. Even when it hurt. Even when it would have been easier to let go. And in that, they had built something no flame could destroy. A forever kind of love.